Thank you for being here. We are going to continue on our message with the study of the life of Jacob in the book of Genesis. This morning we're going to be in Genesis 29. If you want to grab your Bible or one of the ones sitting in the seat in front of you, we're going to read through the passage today and make some observations. But I want to pick up where we kind of left off. So where we are is Jacob has just cheated his brother out of his blessing, and he's deceived his dad while doing so, and now he's running for his life. So, to me, it sounds like a typical Bible story. Deception, running for your life, all these things. But it's an interesting family dynamic that I think Jeff did a great job bringing out last week. And in fact, when I was preparing for this week, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to use some of his slides as a review because they were actually so pithy and so good. So his first slide is Isaac's an old man and his family's falling apart. And Esau, the brother, he's plotting his revenge against Jacob, who's just cheated him out of the blessing from his dad. And Rebekah, her boy, is fleeing for his life and doesn't know if she'll ever see him again, which unfortunately she doesn't, and if he'll ever make it away from his brother's clutches. So Jacob flees, runs for his life, escaping from Esau, and now he's on his own. He's anonymous. He has no family, no friends. He's out on his own. And his first day, he runs 48 miles until he reaches the town of Bethel. I love this, how Jeff said he needs some shut-eye, so he took Ambien. So I didn't know they had that in the ancient world, but I know Jeff does his research, so I'm sure they had Ambien, so that's what it is. He falls asleep. He has a dream. He sees this ladder going up to heaven, and God speaks to him and says, I am the God of your grandfather and your father. And he leaves it at that, because he doesn't know yet if Jacob is going to make him his God. But he makes a promise to Jacob. He says, I will make the blessings that I had for your father and your grandfather, I'm going to make those blessings yours. And further, he proclaims his presence with Jacob, that I'm going to be with you. And Jacob awakes from this dream and realizes he's been in the presence of God. And then his final conviction, he says, since God is with me and will keep me on this journey, then the Lord will be my God. So he's made this decision, his grandfather made, Abraham, and his father, Isaac, made, that this God would now be his God. I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on what happened last week, but he seems changed by this event. He's coming into this chapter as a schemer, manipulator, and one who would steal from his own brother. And then he has this event in the end of the last chapter, and now he's on his own, supposedly going to family, but he doesn't even know if anybody's going to be there when he gets there. It's without family, without friends, all on his own. And the first verse of chapter 29 tells us something interesting. It says, then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. And most of the time when you read the English translations that we're reading, it's very accurate. This particular word doesn't do it justice. When it says that Jacob went, it actually, the Hebrew word means that his feet were lifted up, that he lifted up his feet. And it's, if you think, they lived in sort of an image world. Everything was about images and everything had meaning. So when they say that his feet were lifted up, there's something different about him. That really they're saying his spirit is lifted. His heart is no longer heavy. His heart is lightened by this whole thing. So Jacob has been changed by this encounter as a testimony of this first verse. It says how he moves forward in his journey. From this point on, you're going to see in the rest of the story, he's not so much a cheat and a schemer. That stuff is pretty much absent from him at this point in time. He's really, as we see in the story later, he's really very decent to his father-in-law, Laban, but I won't give that away. So this encounter with God, it clearly changed him. It lifted his feet, meaning it lifted his heart. And the heaviness of Jacob is gone. And the interesting thing is, as you look at this change within Jacob, is actually nothing is different. Isn't he still running out of food, running away? Isn't he still without family and friends? He has no shelter. And isn't he still traveling somewhere where he's never been before and he doesn't know anyone? And isn't he going to family, supposedly, but there's no cell phones. He doesn't know if they're there. He doesn't know if they've moved on. He doesn't know if he does get there that they're going to be destitute and can't help him, or they don't want him. He just doesn't know. Oh, yeah, and one of the most important facts, he's got 500 miles to go to walk with his lifted feet. But there's something about him, the Bible testifies, says is very different. Look at that map. So that map, that very low left-hand area, the first little line that goes up, that's where he is, and the rest of that line all the way up to Haran is where he has to go. And yet, all of that distance, all of these things pressing on him, yet somehow his spirit is lifted. And one of the ways I think I want to analyze how his spirit is lifted, because it's kind of a miraculous thing, because there's really nothing that practically that should be lifted in him. I want to look back and kind of analyze what was making him heavy before, what was weighing on his heart. First of all, he's been on his own. Even with his family, he has been trying to make his own way, to scratch out his own inheritance, his own destiny. Jeff highlighted it last week. It was in chapter 27. When he's cheating his brother and deceiving his dad. Remember, he was supposed to get some wild game and cook it up and give it to his dad, and his dad would give him the blessing. And he's impersonating Esau when he does this. And so he comes into the tent with Isaac, and Isaac's first thing he says in verse 20, he says, "How is it that you found this so quickly, that you found the wild game so quickly?" And Jacob says, he answered, "Because the Lord your God granted me success." It was clear that Jacob's God was not, that his grandfather's God was not his God. And if Jacob at that point in time had already made God his God, I think things would have been very, very different for him. For one thing, he had a prophetic word on him already. All this stuff he was cheating for, the inheritance, the blessing, all this thing prophetically was already his. God had already determined that God had spoken over this child in the womb, saying that he wins. He's the younger, but he wins. He carries on the God blessing. He gets the inheritance, both spiritual and physical. But because Jacob had not made God his God, he had no real benefit from that. He had no experiential feeling of that, and therefore he's clawing at life on his own. It's a very heavy, heavy, heavy load. It is a heavy load to try and live life on our own, without a God, without someone who watches out for us, whose presence is with us. I see this in a lot of people around where we live. Living without God to take care of you, it's hard, it's heavy, it's a load. And I even see it sometimes with Christians, that they're trying to eke out their own way in life. They're trying to figure everything out as if everything depended upon them. And that lightheartedness which Jacob experiences is actually our birthright as a believer. In Galatians 5, it says that love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, and all these really good attributes are fruits of the Spirit. They're things that we have, that it is our birthright to feel these things, the love and the joy. But oftentimes we get a little lost in what we're supposed to do too. We get burdened down and the heaviness of trying to do it on our own. We forget, like Jacob, that he had a birthright. He had a birthright. He had a God that was watching out for him and leading him. And Jeff said it last week. He said, when we're not feeling that and experiencing that lightheartedness, the first thing we got to do is ask why. Wait a minute, this is mine. This is my inheritance. Why am I not experiencing that? I think looking at Jacob a little further, we can find out why he was so heavy, and I think it reflects a little bit on us, like this issue of trying to eke it out all on our own. Another thing I think that was making him heavy was the fact that, he just cheated his brother, and he deceived his dad. He had to be pretty ashamed of himself. He had to feel pretty guilty. So he's running for his life. He has time to reflect back on, oh my gosh, what did I do? And it's interesting that God did not even mention the problems that he created for himself or the things that he did wrong when God encounters him. So in a way, God had already forgotten the incident. I like this verse. When I do things like that, I just things like that, and I look back and I go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. I had this experience about a week ago. I got Rhonda a new car, and it was about 10 days old, and then the screen went out, and had to take it in. It's frustrating, a brand new car, and something's broken on it. So took it in. I'm already frustrated, and bring it in. The guy goes, okay, it'll be ready at the end of the day. And then, no, now we need to order a part, so it'll be tomorrow. And then the part didn't come in, so now it was 3 days. And so, I'm just frustrated. And then it was, well, it'll be done at noon. And then, went on and on. So about 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, I just got hot with the guy. I go, look, it's a brand new car. You're keeping me, it's been in the shop now about half the time that I've owned it. And I hung up the phone, and I thought, you know what? He didn't need that. I'm sure he's having a tough enough day, and I did not need to do that. So that sort of that spirit just kind of hits you, and you go, you need to clean this up. A lot of people just let it go. Okay, I'll be nice next time. That's not me. I got to resolve this. So, I just brought God into it. I said, God, I just need you to orchestrate this. I don't know. The way I talked to this guy, I think maybe the secretary is going to call me back to say the car is ready. So anyway, he called me back, and it was fascinating. He actually apologized for his attitude to me. And I stopped him and I said, no, I think I was setting you off. I was the one who was coming at you. I'm very sorry for that. And so I resolved all that. And then it's time to let it go. Sometimes Christians, we have trouble with that. We just got to let it go. Listen to this verse. I love this verse in Philippians 3. Philippians 3:13, Paul is saying, but this one thing I do, forget what lies behind, and I strain forward. And the word strain forward is with everything that's in you, you're just reaching out. I strain forward for what lies ahead. What's the next thing, God? What is the next thing you have planned for me? Because that's the important thing. There may be things we settle that we may have done wrong in the past, but then we move forward. We forget it, as did God. When that ladder appears to Jacob, God does not say anything regarding what he had just done. It is forgotten. It is over. Because we all have problems weighing on our heart. And we all need to move forward in terms of what God has planned for us. I've shared this verse many times, Jeremiah 29:11. For surely I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for welfare and not for harm, to give you a future and a hope. This is our birthright. This is our position with God. This is our relationship with God. In the New Testament, 1 Corinthians 2:9, one of my favorite verses, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, and what has not even entered the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him. The notion is, you haven't even seen what God has in mind for you. And you've never even heard about it, what God has in mind for you. And you know what? You can't even imagine it. This is our God. This is the steps he has in front of us, as Jacob has now lightened his heart and come to realize. Let's move on in the story. Verse 2, Genesis 29. As he looked, he saw a well in the field and 3 flocks of sheep lying there beside it. For out of that well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, my brothers, where do you come from? They said, we are from Haran. That is where Jacob's family is from, by the way. He says, we are from Haran. He said to them, do you know Laban, son of Nahor? They said, yes, we do. Verse 6, he said to them, is it well with him? Yes, they replied, and here is his daughter Rachel coming with the sheep. Quick thing to note here, Jacob, again, is different. The Scripture's trying to give us these little clues. The question he asked these guys, he says, do you know him? Does he live here? Okay, great. That's the information he really needs to know. He needs to know where his relatives live. But then he says, is he at peace? The word is shalom. Is there peace with Laban? This is probably the first time in the story, possibly the first time in Jacob's life, that he's actually been concerned with somebody else's peace. And the Scripture's going out of its way to try and highlight that for us. Verse 7, it says, he said, look, it is still, he's talking to the shepherds still, look, it's still daylight. It is not time for the animals to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep together. this is one of those pieces of information the Bible go, I don't even know why this is here. I'm not sure what this is really telling me. But I think it's foreshadowing, actually. It's actually showing that that Jacob knows what he's doing. He's actually a good shepherd, and these shepherds are really not very good shepherds because they're supposed to let the flock they're supposed to let them graze all day long so they get nice and fat and be healthy. And these guys, it's 3:30, let's just go water them, and, then it's too late to get them out into the fields again. So they're foreshadowing this because part of this story is how valuable Jacob is going to be to Laban, who grazes flocks. And this is the employment pool that Laban is pulling from, these guys who want to quit at 3:30. That's I think the reason it's there. Verse 9, while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. Now when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of his mother's brother Laban, and the sheep of his mother's brother Laban, I thought his mother's brother. And then Jacob went up and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of his mother's brother Laban. They really want to be clear. This is his mother's brother. All right. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. Well, there you go. First time you meet your cousin, your future wife, and you kiss her and weep aloud. This is Bible world, I guess. Remember the promise of last chapter, what God had promised Jacob? I think the reason for his tears is this is probably the first time in Jacob's life, because he has now made God his God, the first time he's seen God's plan actually manifest. Now, God's plan has been manifesting in Jacob's life his whole life, but this is probably the first time he's actually recognized it. And the promise from God was, behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go. And the word keep refers to a shepherd. A shepherd, what they do is they lead their flock. They lead them to certain places. They lead them to certain encounters. And it really is pretty bizarre. He's outside of this town, and lo and behold, his cousin, he's looking for family, his cousin shows up, and his future wife shows up. This is an encounter that is not a coincidence. Jacob clearly recognizes this, thus the tears. There's no such thing as a chance meeting when we walk with God. It's something we should always remember. And we've never seen this guy before. We've never seen this guy react to the movement of God before. We've never seen him do work for other people. And he's going to move this stone out of the way and do this for Rachel. It probably doesn't hurt that she's good looking, but, we never see him do things. Normally we see his mother telling him what to do. And then this whole thing where he kisses Rachel is just funny. The commentators kept commenting on this passage that there's a lot of laughter in here for somebody from the Middle East, particularly from the ancient world. Guy doesn't kiss a woman if he's not married to her. And he's just sort of overcome with his emotion. He's just walked 550 miles to find a person like her, so you can understand why he's that way. So he kisses her, and then he weeps aloud, which I think it's not a great dating strategy, actually. Something about it just doesn't strike me that way. So anyway, overcome with emotion. I got a picture in the next slide of the size of these stones, and that's kind of the size of the stones that he pushed away. The shepherds were waiting because it took probably 2 or 3 people to get those stones away, but he goes there and just, must have been a burly guy, and just kind of shows off for Rachel and pushes this stone away. Again, sort of tongue-in-cheek, so you kind of chuckle at this story at this point in time. There's a real good laugh for people in the ancient world in the next couple verses. Listen to this. It says, and Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. When Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, he ran to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him into his house. Jacob told Laban all these things. Thus, running going around. We don't get it today, but in the ancient world, they had to completely be laughing at this because they all wore dresses. They all wore these robes down to their ankles. So in order to run, you got to grab the robe and pull it up, and off you go. It was somewhat shameful. It was definitely awkward. So, there's just so much excitement going on between Jacob, between his family. They're all meeting each other. And the Bible keeps those details in it. Verse 14, and Laban said to him, surely you are bone of my bone and my flesh. and he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. So at this point in time, it's kind of our first introduction to Laban. He sounds excited to see his nephew. And it sounds like Jacob's lived with him for a month. Basically, the wages that Jacob has had is a couple meals a day and a warm bed. And it just sounds like, wow, this he's a decent guy. This could go on for a while, and he could just kind of, Jacob obviously is a hard worker. He knows what he's doing, more so than the shepherds in the area. And I think I have a different perspective on it, even without reading the rest of the story as we find out what Laban is really like. But I think even at this point, I have a different take on it, because I had this experience where I can really relate to this. I can relate to these 2 guys, with Jacob and Laban. Because as some of you know, I worked with my dad for 12 years, and he was a Laban kind of guy. He was not really a good guy. He definitely tried to cheat me here and there. And I started working for him. It was really just a temp job. I was working for a CPA firm for several years, and then he started a clinic, and he said, "Hey, why don't you just kind of get my clinic together, and then you can move on in your career," which was my plan. I was going to work for him for 6 months, and I really liked healthcare. It was interesting, and I wasn't finding other opportunities that I found equally as interesting. So I stayed, and as time went on, I thought, my dad just got worse and worse, and just in terms of his behavior, his cheating, he just got worse and worse. And God really spoke to me during this period of time. He made it clear that I was sort of living out that kind of story, that I was as if Jacob, and he was going to be like Laban. And God made it clear to me, because he kept closing doors. I kept looking for another job when I realized this was the dynamic working with him, and there were just closed doors. There just was no opportunity. And God really made it clear to me. He said, "Yeah, this is a situation like Laban, and he's going to cheat you, and this is the plan. This is the plan for you." And I think the thing, even beyond him cheating me, one of the most irritating parts of it was God continued to bless my dad financially. From the time, I'm sharing something in a video with one of Doug's messages in a few weeks, but in the time period, those 12 years, my dad's wealth grew by about 30-fold. And it wasn't me. It was God blessing him through me. And it was abundantly clear to me. Doug and I were good friends back then. It was so obvious, so clear to him as well. So when I read this passage and Laban is trying to seal a deal with Jacob, I just see it differently. Because the fact is, he's just a relative right now. He's sleeping in the back room. He's giving him a couple meals. He's nomadic. He may move on. And this is a way to seal Jacob down. This is a way to pull him in. And so he does this deal with Jacob to secure his future, Jacob's future there. And it says later in the passage that Laban knows. He knows spiritually that God is blessing Laban through Jacob. So Jacob wants this deal to keep that blessing coming from Jacob. And it was like my dad. I mean, my dad wanted to keep me on board every time I was looking for another job. He was trying to do all kinds of antics to try and keep me there. And it wasn't that he liked me or he was proud of me. It was sad. He just knew I was useful and I was making him rich. So I get this guy. I get this passage. I get the dynamic with Laban, and we're going to see in a few minutes what Laban does here. So they make this deal. It's verse 16. Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, and Rachel was graceful and beautiful. Quick aside, when it says Leah's eyes were weak, it's kind of a bad word. Weak, it actually means beautiful. It actually means in a tender, beautiful, kind way. And it's a Bible metaphor. When the Bible speaks of eyes, it's really not talking about their eyes physically. It's talking about their soul. This is what a person is like. Jesus says this, the eye is the window to the soul. And so this is Bible speak for saying this woman is beautiful. She's lovely. She's tender. She's kind. It makes the story all that much more tragic as we see what happens with Leah. Verse 18, Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, look, here's the deal. I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel. Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. A couple of notes here. One is, the deal is an interesting deal because Jacob says, I'll work 7 years for Rachel. Laban's deal was, you can work 7 years for her. And we've got a lawyer over here, That isn't necessarily the same deal. The Bible's very careful in picking those words. Also, note here, it says that it doesn't say anything actually about Rachel. It doesn't say that Rachel loved Jacob at all. It just doesn't comment. You don't know if she did or she didn't. It just doesn't say. Verse 21. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed. So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And parenthesis, Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her maid. Verse 25, when morning came, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, what is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? Laban said, this is not done in our country, giving the younger before the firstborn. Yeah, a little codicil in the contract that you just didn't read, Jacob. Complete the week for this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me yet another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as a wife. Again, parenthesis, they want to name these maids. Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her maid. That'll be significant a little later. Verse 30, so Jacob went into Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. He served Laban for another 7 years. The words more than, tragically, are added later. Actually, it really is saying he loved Rachel, and he was sort of indifferent towards Leah. Today, we don't get this story. I mean, seriously, if a guy came to me and said, yeah, I got married yesterday, and oh my gosh, I married the wrong girl. Seriously? It sounds like one of those really awful hangover movies or something. It's just like, seriously? You kind of have to get your head into the Middle East. We see it for the last 40 years in Iran. Women are veiled up to their eyes. You really can't tell who the person is behind there. So clearly that was the tradition then. And there's a party all day, there's wine, it's late at night, so you can fill in the gaps as to how this may have happened. And the interesting thing about this story is it really is a what goes around comes around. Not only is Jacob double-crossed now, he's double-crossed in exactly the same way that he double-crossed his father and his brother, by a disguise, by somebody disguising themselves as someone else. And wow, throughout this story there's this undercurrent of Leah, this poor girl. Her father so disrespects her, so treats her, that he dumps her onto a guy who doesn't like her. Anyway, we're going to get into that a little bit more. Verse 31, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb. But Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has looked on my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she named him Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son, and said, now this time my husband will be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi. She conceived again and bore a son, and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. And then she ceased bearing children. Names are significant in the Old Testament. They're significant, actually, even today. East of the Mediterranean, names mean something. Ron and I were sitting with guy at Wells Fargo the other day, and he was obviously not American, and I said, where are you from? And he said, I'm from Afghanistan. And he had a name that was hard to pronounce, and I said, so what does your name mean? And then when I said that, I thought, oh, that might be arrogant. Maybe I just assume that everybody east of the Mediterranean, their names mean something, because my name doesn't mean anything. I assume probably most of your names don't, if you're American. So no, he perked up. He got very proud. He says, it means brave. I think that's what he said. It means brave. And then he gave me the whole name. It's like 20 syllables long. And he's brave one of God. He was very proud of that name. And this is part of the ancient world. It's part of still east of the Mediterranean. People are usually named by their parents, which has meaning. It means something about them. So let's look at some names. So Leah, her name actually means weary. And I think it's interesting because in the story so far, she's had 4 kids, 4 boys. We know she has at least one girl. It's disclosed later. She probably has other girls within there. The reason they're naming the boys is because these become the 12 tribes of Israel. So by this time, she's probably got 6 kids. Then she stops having kids. So then her maidservant has kids, and she adopts those kids. And they have 3. That maid has 3 boys, probably some girls. So, I mean, Leah's got 10, 12 kids. Weary is a good name for her. Maybe we call her Mommy Tired, something like that. So her name fits her. And look at what she names. When she names her boys, it's really reflective of her. It's reflective of her mindset. So let's think about Leah when she names her boys. Reuben, his name, it means, behold, a son. And then her commentary on it is, surely now my husband will love me. Look, a son. Your legacy goes on. The promise goes on. Maybe now you'll love me. The next child is Simeon, and it means he has heard. So here there's a reflection that she's pouring out her tragedy of being an unloved wife. She's pouring out her tragedy to God. And she's saying, naming this child, he has heard. He's heard me. He's given me a second son. The third son is Levi. It means attached. And she says, her commentary is, this time my husband will be attached to me. It means to come alongside. It means to be together. So she's still pining for Jacob's love. And the fourth son is probably the most interesting. It's her last child before she stops having kids, and his name is praise or celebration, and no mention of Jacob. And I think you can see a progression here. I think you see a progression of her thought, of what she was going through. First of all, she's like Jacob. She starts out with her own strategy. Her strategy relies upon nature and a lot of other things, but she has a strategy to get her husband to love her. And her strategy is to have boys, because that's meaningful to him. So she names these boys, maybe now he'll love me, maybe now he'll love me. And you can see this pathos here, this really tragic situation. She, again, is the beautiful one. She's a wonderful person, but she's just pining for her husband's love. Reuben and Levi, this is their hope. And then she names Simeon, which is an interesting one, because it does show this shift, that she's starting to take this sorrow in her heart, this incompleteness that she feels, this longing that she feels. And we all feel this way. We all have longings. We all have things we're praying for. Sometimes we get other people to pray with us and we disclose it. Sometimes they're just longings in our heart that we're continually laying before God. And that's kind of what Leah is doing. And she names this son. He has heard. Is reflective as, okay, he's listening to me. And then the fourth, named praise. Finally, Leah has peace. She has peace within, and she doesn't even mention what she has been longing for from her husband. She finds this source of happiness, which, philosophically, happiness is an experience on our insides. It's not out there. It's not the love of a husband or things out there. It's something we experience inside where God is. And Leah has discovered that. Just paralleling these steps with us, we live in an area where people all around us, it's if I could just move to that other house or a better neighborhood, or I could just have a better car, or if I was just out of debt. I call this the just around the corner thinking. And it's like, oh, if I could just get around that corner. And anybody who's met with me in mentorship, they know that I have one line. Around that corner, guess what you find? Another corner. Because while you are looking for something outside of yourself to bring peace to your heart, you're going to simply, once you get around that corner, you're going to simply be doing it the same way, looking for something outside of you to find peace. And instead, we should be laying all of these things at God's feet. Oftentimes, maybe we'd call it grieving because of the things we long for that we don't have, pouring our hearts out to Him, and then finding peace in Him as He heals us, as He answers some of those things, and as He answers all of them. Sometimes He just says no. Therein lies the great lesson of Leah. Many things that we all want changed in our lives. And we have to come to the place where we become settled with God and settled that God is enough. Listen to this verse, Psalm 73, verse 25. This psalmist in this psalm, he's kvetching over life and how life seems unfair and God seems to be blessing the unrighteous people. And here I am following you and I don't have any blessing. And he finally comes to this resolution. He settles the matter with God, and he comes to this and he says, "Whom have I in heaven but you? And besides you, I desire nothing on earth," i.e., I know it won't give me peace. Anything out here. 26 says, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my inheritance forever." And a note on Leah in terms of her process. In the next chapter, which Doug will teach on next week, verse 12, it says, "Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son." Remember, she's adopting these sons, so Leah herself is naming them. So then it says, "Then Leah said, 'Happy am I, for women will call me happy.' So she named him Asher," which means happy and content. And it's interesting. So it's really gone the full length. She's found peace inside, and now she's able to see that other people are looking at her and saying, "You're peaceful, you're happy. And your life is pretty much the same. He still doesn't love you, but you're happy, you're peaceful." Both Jacob and Leah are changed by God. Jacob encounters God in the wilderness, and Leah processes through her own struggles in life, and they both come to the same conclusion of the lifted heart, of finding peace in that journey. Both Jacob and Leah started with the same strategy, trying to make their lives work out with their own mechanisms, their own strategy. Jacob's cheating, Leah's childbearing, believing those are formulas for peace. Both went through lonely heartache. Both were happier, stronger, and more content afterwards. And they both learned to draw their peace from God. In closing, I want to share this verse from Psalm 37, it's verse 4. Many of you probably know it. It says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." And I think there's two interpretations for this verse, equally powerful, equally valuable. The first interpretation, which I think is the most common among believers, is if you delight yourself in God, He knows what you want. He will start to fulfill those needs for you. And it fits with Matthew 6, "Seek first His kingdom and His righteousness, and all these things will be added to you." It all fits with the New Testament doctrine. But there's another way to interpret this verse also, and that is it's somewhat circular in its logic. In that when you learn to delight yourself in God, then God is your focus, and God is the thing that you desire. And circularly, of course, if you delight in God, He will give you the desire, meaning you desire God. So you have this beautiful relationship with God as you continue to pursue Him. Things become less important and less interesting, and He becomes the heart of it all. Well, with that, let me pray. Father, thank you that you have a plan for our lives. that you are the essence of peace and happiness. And Father, continue to teach us, all of us. It's not just a one-time doctrine, Lord. It's something we do repeatedly, where we develop our own strategies. We pretend that it's all left on us. Lord, help us remember that you have things which we cannot even imagine, and that our goal really in life is to delight ourselves, to pursue you, Father, to find that peace and happiness that we all desire. In Jesus' name, amen.